When I was much younger, I used to hang out on various internet forums. I won't share the names of them because I have no idea if some of them still exist or their archives can be tracked down, and I don't want my dumb teenage self to get me cancelled in 2025. Now, I don't actually remember where I specifically met Baghead. It may have just been on Twitter now that I think about it. And he quickly started cropping up on a few places I frequented. But that wasn't too unusual since most of my online social group came from the same places. It was definitely Twitter where he'd first reached out to chat with me though. And now I'm pretty guarded and savvy about people wanting to befriend and talk to me. But back then I was kind of happy to chat to anyone, which is a big mistake. Baghead wasn't the first weirdo who latched onto me through my forum use, but he was most definitely the most intense. After a few days of talking, he began to hint that not only was I his soulmate, but he was most definitely mine, too. If you've never had someone try to convince you of that, there's a pretty big difference. And when someone's trying to get with you, it's easy enough for them to list all of the things they like about you to try and flatter you. Now, Baghead did all of this, but he also constantly talked about the ways we'd be compatible. And hopefully you can imagine what I mean by that. And I stress that I did absolutely nothing to provoke this kind of conversation. In fact, a bit of backstory about me. I have no interest in that kind of thing whatsoever due to some deeply unpleasant events in my childhood. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that I can be extremely traumatized by intimate talk and intrusive intimate suggestions. I learned very quickly on the internet that, in the words of a great philosopher, not to be some woke but women have it hard, man. And that's why every time I made a new friend, especially a guy, I was always very upfront and clear about the fact that I only wanted friendship, actively wasn't interested in romance or more, and simply wasn't wired that way. And I wouldn't become friends with a guy until I was sure that he understood this. Baghead assured me that he understood this and sympathized, and even had a sister who was in the same position as me, and blah 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 blah. I'm not sure I ever really fell for it, but you can still see why that it was a bit of a shock when after a week, he sent me a lengthy confession admitting his love for me. If it had just been that, I think that we could have moved on from it. But he also included some fairly explicit, descriptive talk about things that he'd like for us to do together, things that just hadn't ever been discussed between us. He also drew some very gross anime-style fan art of me which pretty much unsettled me, and it was completely unprompted. I was horrified, but stupid me, I tried to explain to him that we didn't have that kind of relationship and that I didn't want to have that kind of interaction with him. Now, I can totally understand Baghead being disgusted at his mistake. I kind of expected him to disappear forever after this. Instead, he threw a huge pity party tantrum, ranting and raving and screaming about how much of a terrible person he was and how he ruined everything. How he destroyed everything beautiful and how no friendship could ever last because of his stupid head. He said he wanted to cave his own skull in and cut his own face off and all sorts of extreme frantic stuff. At the time, I was young and dumb and naive, like I said, and didn't realize that this was an emotionally abusive attention-seeking technique. So, my stupid ass was genuinely concerned for Baghead. Naturally, I went out of my way to reassure him that it was okay, but he hadn't screwed anything up and that I'd still be his friend. I told him I didn't really appreciate the weird fanfic about me, but I hadn't clicked on it, so it was no big deal. Baghead had calmed down but started sending me photos of himself, clearly not wearing a shirt, and asking what I thought of his face and hair. And he had long, messy hair and was clearly proud of it. And beyond that, he was just a normal stocky dude. Not battle-looking. But like I said, I'm not wired that way. And I told him he looked good though, trying to just be nice, and that was clearly a mistake. He kept sending me more and more photos, mirror selfies that showed off more and more of his pasty chest. And it ended with half of our conversations just involving him spamming me with selfies and asking what I thought of his face and hair. And what was I supposed to keep saying? Eventually, I told him it was getting a bit much and that I didn't really know what to say in response to all the identical selfies that were getting more and more bathroom focused. And I very gently suggested that I'd prefer that he would wear a shirt in them, you know. And this led to another absolutely terrifying meltdown. This time he sent me messages and posted tweets talking about how he should cut his heart out of his chest, carve loser into his flesh, cut his hands and arms off, and then finally cut his face off again. This time I wasn't quite as intimidated by it because he'd made these threats before and never so much as even slapped himself on the cheek. But it's still pretty horrible to hear an adult male screaming about how disgusting he is in voice notes, especially when you know that the implication is that you made him feel that way. Once again, it fell to me to try and make him feel better and assure him that it was fine. He hadn't ruined our friendship and all that stuff. And he acted really sad and volatile for a day or two, and I was starting to worry that maybe he actually would do some harm to himself. And that's when he messaged me with the request that would make him feel better. His self-confidence was at an all-time low, he said, and the only way he saw himself getting out of it was if a female friend could give him a confidence boost and tell him that his unclothed body was attractive. Yeah, he was asking to send that kind of photo, so I would say that he looks good to help his mental health, and this was too much for me. I told him that I would prefer that he didn't do that and that it's something that he should save for a future partner. And then I just hit offline for the next few days. Now, during this time, he had an absolute meltdown on social media, making vague references to how his toxic self had ruined yet another friendship and how he was a negative and cancerous presence in other people's lives, etc. All very intense, scary stuff for a young woman like myself. And I ignored it and pretended that I didn't see it. And after a few days, he sent me an offline message asking if I was okay and if he'd done anything wrong. Not wanting to get into drama, I told him that he hadn't and I was just going through some really difficult PTSD things. Baghead told me he understood and that he'd leave me to it. The next day, I received an email from Baghead and I expected some kind of drama or hand-wringing, but instead it was a video file in a single sentence that said, "To cheer you up." I did not click on that video file because I know better than to open unknown video files emailed unexpectedly from weirdos. Instead, I asked Baghead what he'd sent me. And as blunt as you could imagine, he told me it was a video of him enjoying himself in a solo manner that he'd made for me to cheer me up and make me feel better. And I was so horrified to the point that I was actually mad at him. But I also knew how volatile he got and how he threatened to hurt himself every time I rejected him. I decided that I just politely say that I wasn't really interested and then just slowly stopped communicating with him. If I blocked him on instant messengers, he wouldn't know. Because I usually set my status to appear offline anyways. And I told him that I wasn't going to watch the video and reminded him that I was specifically dealing with childhood trauma, so it wasn't really my type of thing. And instead of losing his mind for a change, he actually started lecturing me on how it would be good for me and how it would make me feel better and how I really should just give his video a watch to see if I enjoyed it because he was confident it would essentially fix me. And I hope it's clear at this point, but Baghead didn't really know me that well. Or have any insight as to why I wasn't interested in this stuff beyond him being creepy and weird in the first place. I just told him I wasn't and that I don't feel like he was owed any answers. And all I'd say is that he was absolutely off the mark and there was no way that this was an appropriate thing to subject me to. I'm calm about it when I recount the story, but at the time it was genuinely really weighing on me. Baghead was a volatile, angry, pushy guy. He had this whole shtick of understanding women's struggles, but used it almost exclusively to talk down to me and then act like he could fix my trauma. Essentially by sending me all sorts of disgusting imagery of himself. It was gross, terrifying, and overwhelming. So, I stopped speaking to him on instant messenger. And he did not take this well. To start, I still followed him on Twitter and Facebook because I was terrified of the drama that would result in me blocking or unfollowing him in a way that he could see. And he fully took advantage of that. And the week after I refused to watch his creepy video, he posts thousands and thousands of words of rants on Twitter and Facebook. And at first, he kept talking about how he always drove people away and how he was a toxic poison. Quickly though, he started blaming a third party, me obviously, and ranting about how everyone took advantage of him, spat on his kindness, manipulated and dismissed him, blee blah blah, cry me a river. And he was clearly trying to make me feel guilty as hell and it almost worked. Instead, something kind of snapped in me. And I just got really, really mad. In retrospect, this was my first big experience with a guy being persistently creepy to me online in a way that encroached on my personal space and threatened to affect me directly. Since I'd never really dealt with anything quite like this before, I wasn't sure how to handle it and decided that it would be just better to tell him that I needed to cut him off rather than just do it and have him discover I'd blocked him by chance. Part of me was really worried that he could track me down where I live. He lived fairly close by. Definitely feasible to just drive to see me, and these days it's not too hard to find someone online if you really want to. I DM'd him on Twitter and said, "Hey, this is really doing a number on my mental health, and I can't keep seeing this on my feed, so I'm going to unfollow and block you, but please just move on and leave me alone, and I won't call you out for harassment and all of that." Then I unfollowed him, gave it some time so I could be sure that he'd seen my message, and then blocked him, too. I didn't look at his feed for some time myself, but a few days later, a friend I'd told about the situation let me know that Baghead was posting some pretty extreme stuff on his Twitter. He was again talking about how sick he was of being walked over and taken advantage of, and that on Monday, everything would change. People would look at him differently and they would know that he was a serious person who wasn't to be messed with and that the person who'd recently trampled on his heart would discover the result of her actions. And I was sick worrying about this. Was he threatening to harm me or himself? I asked my friend and even my mom if they thought that I should try and report him to law enforcement and all that. And I didn't actually know his real name or address. I just knew the state that he lived in. So, what could I do? A relative is a local cop, so I at least let them know that this guy was potentially behaving threatening towards me. Thankfully, Monday came and I didn't have to wait for the knife to drop or the trigger to be pulled. Baghead revealed the big dramatic event that he'd been foreshadowing. It was a haircut. He had a haircut, transforming his long hair into a short, neat, regimented buzz cut. And that was the dire action this chump took. And when I looked on his feed, he was a few tweets into rambling and a pretentious essay about how this was a new him and he was no longer going to offer his heart and soul to those who'd trample on it. And sure thing, friendo. Feel free to keep your heart and soul firmly in your pants going forward. And with that, I never looked at this creep's social media feed again. And thank God he never decided to escalate things with me beyond online harassment. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And there are super fun live streams every Sunday and Wednesday night. And you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories and big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. And I also have a true crime channel called Saturn Soul. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember 28. In is coming for you later. Story 2. So, I've been a listener for a few years now. I have a story I've always wanted to share with you, but I've never been able to bring myself to actually write it down and send it in 'cause it kind of makes me sick to my damn stomach. So, my lovely wife, who introduced me to your channel, has finally convinced me to send it in. So, I hope your listeners get a few chuckles or more likely shivers at the completely effed up thing that happened to me, my sister, and my mom when I was a kid. Do you remember AOL Instant Messenger? It started off as an instant messenger client for people who had AOL as a service provider, but eventually anyone could use it. It was the messenger program of choice for the 90s and 2000 kids with the creative away messages you could write, and being one of the first that let you choose your own user picture and username display. You could also customize it so it would give you alert pop-ups for specific people in your friends list, too. And you could assign any sound file you wanted as the alert noise. And because of what happened, I genuinely can't hear the audio clip of Cartman saying, "Screw you guys," without cringing and feeling a little spike of panic. Her name was Gloria, which sounded made up even then. I don't know why, but I could never believe that someone my age would actually be named Gloria. And she insisted it was her real name though, and that she was named after the Laura Branigan song. And that's funny, I said. That's my mom and stepdad's song. Small world, she said, and suggested it was fate that we became friends. Gloria messaged me a lot, always after 9 p.m. She told me she had various clubs and a lot of commitments tight around his face. The third looked like he was built in prison, thick neck, fists like bricks. Mean. They didn't rush me. They didn't yell. They just circled my car. Slowly. Casually. Looking in the windows. Muttering to each other like I couldn't hear. I stayed in the driver's seat, clutching the steering wheel like it was the last safe thing in the world. My phone was in my pocket, but I didn't reach for it. I didn't want to draw attention. Didn't want to give them a reason. "All right, come on out, tough guy," one of them said. "Yeah, keep talking that shit," another added, tapping on my window with his knuckle. I didn't move. One of them kicked the driver's side door, hard. It made me jump. Left a dent, too. They laughed. They stood around in my yard for another 5 minutes, pointing at things. My trash cans. The porch light. My car. Like they were taking stock of what they could mess with. I expected them to slash my tires. Smash a window. Something. But eventually, they got back in the sedan and drove off. No words. No warning. I sat there, frozen, for another 5 minutes before I finally moved. My breathing was all over the place. porch light glint. He had something in his hand. I couldn't tell what, maybe a tire iron, maybe a flashlight, but it caught the porch light just wrong, casting weird shadows and a sharp glint that made my stomach drop. I backed away from the window. Locked the deadbolt. Then the knob. Then slid the security chain into place with trembling fingers. My heart was thudding so loud it sounded like footsteps inside my ears. I didn't have a gun. Never thought I'd need one. No mace, either. Just a kitchen full of dull knives and a duller sense of regret. Then came the pounding. Flat palm first. Then fists. One of them barked, "Come on, tough guy. Say what you said earlier." The door shook under each hit. It was old, rental-grade hollowcore. Useless if they really wanted in. For a second, I just stood there. Living room lights still on. Socks on my feet. Beer going warm on the table. My mouth was dry as chalk. I thought about calling the cops. But what would I even say? 3 guys are outside being scary? I grew up around rough kids. I knew how that would go. They'd be gone long before a cruiser showed up, if one even came. I turned off the lights. The dark made everything feel thinner, more fragile. Their voices outside were louder now. One tried the knob. Another stomped on the porch like a pissed-off toddler. Then, silence. I crept into the back bedroom. Closet door open. Inside was something I hadn't touched in years, a cheap-ass katana I bought at a state fair in high school. Not sharpened. Just a steel replica meant for a display stand. But it was long. Heavy. And it looked real in the dark. I grabbed it. Opened a plastic bin. Dug out an old Halloween mask, rubber demon face with twisted horns and yellowed fangs. It reeked of dust and plastic. I shoved it on anyway. Slipped out the back door. The grass was wet under my feet. My chest pounding like a war drum. I moved along the side of the house, keeping low. Then I saw them, 3 guys near the porch, pacing, pissed and confused. 30 more seconds, one yelled, "Then we break your *****ing windows." I didn't give myself time to think. I charged. Barefoot. Wild. Katana raised. Letting out a scream that tore straight out of my chest. They turned all at once, and froze. A barefoot maniac with a sword and demon mask barreling at them out of the darkness? It was enough. One of them screamed. The biggest one tripped trying to backpedal. All 3 bolted to their car. Slammed the doors. Peeled out in a screech of tires and panic. I stood in the yard until their engine faded into the night. That was the last time I ever saw them. After that, I started locking the doors before sunset. Got a motion light installed. Even bought a real baseball bat, wooden, solid. Not for show. I still live alone. Still eat too much cheap Chinese. Still waste too many nights on the couch. But I don't mouth off to strangers anymore. The day I was truly alone. Growing up in Pakistan, our home was always bustling. My grandparents, my aunt and uncle, their 3 children, the neighbors, and of course, frequent visitors. We had an open-door policy, both literally and figuratively. It was the kind of neighborhood where people rarely locked their doors during the day. It felt safe, familiar. Or so we thought. Like many families, we hired domestic help, cooks, cleaners, and general assistants. My grandparents opted for female helpers, especially with daughters in the house, but they also employed a male helper named Basher. He had his own quarters outside the main house. While his presence was normalized in our culture, something about him always unsettled me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was just me being cautious. Whatever it was, I developed this habit of locking any room I was in, even when others were home. Life in Pakistan, especially for a young girl, was different. My grandparents were wealthy, but money didn't guarantee safety. You always had to be alert. One spring afternoon changed everything. I was alone in my aunt and uncle's bedroom, watching TV. It was my secret little escape. Their room had a private television, unlike the shared one downstairs. At the time, I didn't realize I was the only one home. My grandfather was at work. My aunt and uncle had taken the kids on a day trip. My grandmother had gone out on an errand with the driver. I was truly alone. Then came a knock, loud, repetitive, urgent that I froze. I muted the TV and crept to the door, pressing my ear against it. It was Basher. He was calling my name, his tone anxious and rushed. He said he needed to give me something. I told him to leave it at the door. He paused. Then he said he needed to ask me something, but when I insisted he ask through the door, he said nothing. Instead, the doorknob began to turn. The frame creaked as he shoved against it. Harder. Again. My heart pounded. Reality sank in. I was alone. With him. Panic set in, but so did survival instinct. I scanned the room for options. The landline phone was useless without the directory, which was downstairs. I hadn't memorized a single number. I darted to the window, hoping to see a neighbor, a vendor, anyone. But the street was empty. Basher was still trying to get in. I considered the closet, but it didn't lock. So I ran into the attached bathroom. It had 2 locks. I bolted them both and climbed onto the toilet to reach the small, high window. From there, I could see the neighboring house. I screamed for help. No one came. Just as I gathered my breath to scream louder, I heard a voice, my grandmother's, calling my name from the hallway. I froze again, unsure if I was hallucinating. But then she called again, louder, clearer. I opened the bathroom door carefully. Then, slowly, the bedroom door. She stood there, alone, breathless, wide-eyed. She rushed in and held my arms. I just realized you were home by yourself, she said between gasps. I came back as fast as I could. I never told her what happened. Not exactly. I don't know if she noticed Basher retreating, or if she sensed something was off. Maybe she just saw the look on my face. The whole thing lasted less than 20 minutes, but it was the most terrifying 20 minutes of my life. Feeling trapped, powerless, and cornered inside your own home is a kind of fear that doesn't leave you. Years later, in the mid-2000s, I returned to Pakistan for a visit. By then, I was back in the US with my mom. One afternoon at my grandparents' house, the women in the family, my mom, my aunts, started teasing me about how I used to be so paranoid back then. How I'd lock every door and hide in the bathroom at the slightest sound. I laughed along, quietly. Some things are better left unspoken. The day I met the tiger inside me. It was supposed to be a normal evening. My family had guests, a surprise visitor who had come all the way from another village just to see me. Everyone seemed cheerful, nudging each other and laughing as they told me to come into the living room. I stepped inside, and there he was. Basher. My heart sank. He looked unwell. His eyes were bloodshot. That dazed, distant stare, the kind you only see on people who haven't slept in days, was fixed directly on me. And behind it, something else. Something unreadable. Dangerous. I kept my expression calm, forced a polite smile. I heard you got married. Congratulations, I said. He didn't reply. Just nodded silently, still staring. I muttered a quick excuse and retreated to my room, closing the door behind me. That was the last time I ever saw him. But seeing him again after all those years brought everything rushing back. The fear. The panic. The terrible, unshakable instinct that something horrible almost happened to me that day, and now, I'll never know what he truly intended. But my gut tells me, I narrowly escaped something awful. What Basher didn't know, though, was that I wasn't some naive, easily fooled girl. I was a fighter. I had grown up with 2 older brothers, and I'd been learning karate since I was 6. My instructor used to call me Little Tiger. If he had tried to force his way through that door, he wouldn't have found a frightened child. He would have met the tiger inside me. That day shaped who I became. It taught me about instincts, strength, survival. And I've carried that knowledge with me, silently, all these years. But today, I'm finally saying it out loud. Thanks for listening. Back then. It was 1995. I was 11 years old, living in a quiet little town in the Southwest, one of those places that still felt untouched by the darker side of the world. Both my parents worked full-time, so I was what you'd call a latchkey kid. I didn't mind. We weren't rich, but we had a decent little house with a garage, a backyard, and neighbors who mostly kept to themselves. My parents trusted me to stay out of trouble, and I usually did. Most days after school, I'd ride my bike around until I was tired. We didn't have cell phones or surveillance cameras. Just streetlights and instincts. And I had good instincts. Even as a kid, I knew which dogs barked, which fences were too loose, which roads had rough pavement that could send you flying if you weren't careful. I knew where the creepy houses were, the ones you just felt weird riding past. I knew how to disappear if something didn't feel right. Back then, our town didn't feel dangerous. People left their doors unlocked. Everyone waved from their driveways. We had block parties, barbecues, fireworks shows. Old men mowed each other's lawns just to be helpful. My parents weren't careless. Just busy. They worked long hours, came home exhausted. I understood. I never held it against them. I knew how to make my own snacks. I locked the doors when it got dark. I followed the rules. And nothing ever went wrong, until that night. Freddy. I'd seen Freddy around plenty of times. He lived 4 houses down. Worked as a mechanic or something like that. His carport was full of greasy tools, broken down junkers.